I was diagnosed about 30 years ago. God's honest truth. It was in a town just outside of Houston called Sugar Land. Irony capital of the world now. Right after my diagnosis, I was sent to a specialist, an endocrinologist in downtown Houston. Lovely man. Said to me, he said, "Gary, do not worry. In 5 years, your diabetes, it will be cured." And it made me think, today, what do people hear when they go to their doctor? 5 years, your diabetes will be cured. We've been hearing that for more than 30 years. And we think about all the work we do with JDRF, all the money we raise, all the research that's done. It's very easy to slip into a false sense of thinking that we've failed in our mission to cure diabetes. Even though we don't have a cure today, a complete cure, things have really gotten better over the last 30 years. I mean, think about how things have changed in 30 years' time. 30 years ago, I don't want you to look at the players, look at their shorts. And think about the shorts that people wear nowadays. Now, I have shorts like these, of course, and when I'm out with my kids, I like to wear them just to embarrass them. I don't like wearing them, but it bugs the heck out of my kids, so I like to pull those out. 30 years ago, this was the world leadership, and we didn't blow ourselves to kingdom come. It's a miracle. 30 years ago, this is what video games looked like. Now, who here had an Atari? Come on, who had an Atari? All right. Kids out there, I just want to point something out to you. That's you. That is the bad guy. And your job as this was to kill this. And you shot little pellets at it, and this shot little pellets at you. It was fantastic. It was so cutting edge, because before this we had Pong, which was kind of boring. A lot of people had Pong also. So video games, I think, have come a little bit of a ways in 30 years. Now, 30 years ago, this was at the top of the Billboard charts. I wish I had hair like that. I wish I had any hair, but hair like that. Think I'd look good with hair like that? That would look pretty cool. But think about how diabetes has changed in the last 30 years. In diabetes, things have evolved tremendously, and many of these evolutionary steps have taken place as a result of JDRF-funded research and JDRF-sponsored product development. So looking back at how glucose monitors have changed, the first meters, were huge. And actually, I brought with me the very first blood glucose meter that was designed for home use. This is just the power cord for it. This is the monitor. It's called the dextrometer. So the dextrometer had to be plugged into a wall. It needed a 3-prong outlet. And monitoring glucose back in those days with these types of meters required between 10 and 20 microliters of blood. So it's not like nowadays with the really small samples. But the thing that was most creative about the monitoring process then is the area you applied the blood to on the strip was square. I know, I'm talented, but I'll tell you, I have never been able to get a square drop out of my finger. Has anybody seen a square drop come out of their finger? It's not easy to do. So the size of the meters, the accuracy, and so on has improved considerably. Now you think about what those meters required: big blood samples. You had to wipe the strips, you had to code the meters, you had to blot them, and there were a lot of things that would interfere and cause the readings to be inaccurate. Nowadays, most meters are using about 1/3 of a microliter of blood. So the old meters used about 50 times as much blood as the meters do today. That's progress. That's major progress. They're much faster. They don't require coding. They're much more accurate. The meters in those days, on average, were about 15 to 20% off from lab values. The meters today are closer to 5% for a home type of piece of equipment. That's phenomenal accuracy. And I'm talking about the latest generation of meters. Things like the Vario, things like the Contour Next, the Freestyle Light, the Nano, these newer generation meters. And the technology is not in the meter, it's in the strips. That's where the real good technology sits. So if you're not using one of those latest model meters, get yourself one. They are more precise and easier to use. Some of them have color screens. They light up. They plug right into a computer. You don't even need a cable to download them. We have a couple of meters also that measure ketones. Measuring urine for ketones is, again, it's out of date, literally, because when you measure your urine for ketones, you're finding out if you had ketones in your blood 3 hours ago. If you want a result now, do a measurement on a blood sample. And the Precision Extra and Novamax Plus have that kind of capability. So blood glucose monitoring has evolved considerably. So is lancing. Now, I saved my original lancing device. It was called the Autolet, but most of us had a different name for it. We called it the guillotine. With the guillotine, you had a little platform on the base. You had an arm that you had it was kind of like a catapult where you pull it back and latch it in place. You loaded a 26 gauge lancet in there. And by the way, with lancets, the higher the gauge, the thinner the needle. Thinner needles hurt less. So get a high gauge lancet. So once you loaded it in there, you put your finger on the bottom, you close your eyes, you look the other way, you go, "Mommy," and you fire. Now, lancing pens nowadays prick and retract. You see this retract? No, it stayed in your finger until you took it away. But remember, you needed a 20 microliter square drop of blood dripping off, so it was kind of necessary. All right, so nowadays, again, look for high gauge lancets. Finger stick testing should be painless if it's done right. And that's one of my jobs as a diabetes educator, is to teach people how to use this kind of equipment properly. Finger sticks shouldn't hurt if they're done right. And that means using a very thin lancet, using a lancing device that's adjustable and set for the lowest setting possible that still gets you that third of a microliter drop on your finger. It doesn't require much. Most people have their depth set too high. It hurts more than it has to. So set up your lancets properly. Also, we have lancing devices now with multiple heads and multiple lancets in the heads. They're safe at school because there's no sharp. So we've come a long way even with finger stick testing. About 10 years ago, there was a company that came out with a product called Lazette. Anyone ever hear of the Lazette? I came across this at one of our diabetes trade shows. The Lazette was a monitor. It was a little bigger than the dextrometer. It was tabletop, plugged into a wall, and it shot a laser beam of light on your finger to prick it and get the drop. They're thinking, wow, we can eliminate finger pricks just by using a laser. But there were a few issues with that. When you plugged it in and it warmed up, it sounded like a jet engine. It kind of went. When you fire the laser and you shine that concentrated laser of light on the finger, it hurt. It really hurt. And it's left the smell of burnt flesh in the air. So maybe that's why you've never heard of the Lazette. It just was not a popular thing. See, that's the kind of research and product development that JDRF doesn't fund. And I'm really glad. The JDRF has advisory boards that dictate where all the money we raise goes. And if they feel that something is not worth its efforts, it doesn't go there. It's going into research that really does help us, not the Lazette. It's more useful things. Continuous glucose monitoring 30 years ago did not exist. We did not have continuous glucose monitoring. My very first one, this was about 15 years ago, was called the MiniMed CGMS. MiniMed was the first company to pioneer continuous monitors. We also called this the black box because it was a black box, but also because it just stored your information. It didn't show it to you while you wore it. You had to download it at the doctor's office to get your data. It wasn't wireless. There was a wire that connected the sensor on your body to the black box. And the black box wasn't waterproof, so showering was an endeavor. You had to put this in a plastic bag around your neck. It looked real sexy, trust me. So nowadays we have several systems, the Dexcom G4 Share system, we have the Medtronic Guardian, and also all of Medtronic's sensor-augmented pumps. On the horizon, we have a device called the Libre. The Libre is a system developed by Abbott that is currently available in the United Kingdom and most of Australia and parts of Europe. The Libre has a sensor that sits on your skin for 2 weeks and a handheld monitor that you wave in front of it and it gives you your blood sugar. And the unique thing with this is you don't have to calibrate ever. It's finger stick accurate. It's as accurate as doing a finger stick. And it works beautifully. I tried it for a couple of weeks. It really, really works nicely. It's not available in the United States because the FDA is waiting for people to blow themselves up in other countries before they'll approve it. To my knowledge, no one's blown themselves up with this yet, so it'll probably be here before too long. In terms of how CGMs communicate with us, a couple of years ago, if your child was in another room wearing it, you had to put a baby monitor in there to know what was going on. Nowadays, we have much better equipment. Medtronic has a device called the Sentry. It's kind of like an alarm clock that sits on a parent's bedside that picks up the signal from another room and displays it at a parent's bedside. And it'll set off alarms if the glucose is getting out of range. Dexcom's gone even a step better. Their transmitter goes 30, 40 feet. So a child can be in another room. And now we also have Dexcom's Share system, where if you have an iPhone in the room with that system, and you have an iPhone, you can pick up a signal and get your data right on your phone, and the phone can alert you. That's Dexcom's G4 Share system, which is a pretty nice way to go. Now, in terms of the CGMs themselves, we've seen a lot of progress with these. What they provide for us in real time, we get numbers, we get readings right on screen, we get high-low alerts, we get trending information, and we also get data that we can analyze after the fact. And grade-wise, things just keep getting better. A couple of years ago, if I asked people to grade the readings themselves, they would say, I'd give it a C, maybe a D. Nowadays, most people grade it as around a B or a B+. The accuracy's really improved. The high-low alerts have always received pretty high ratings, mainly because we're not good at feeling when our blood sugar is just a little bit out of range. You ask anyone with type 1 diabetes, when do you start feeling high? When do you know your glucose is too high? Most people will say 300, 350. Some people might say 250, but that's already 3 to 4 times a normal blood sugar level. That's not a good thing. And it's even worse at the low end. You ask, well, when do you sense your lows? I don't know, 60, 50, or when the paramedics wake me up. The hypoglycemia unawareness is rampant. 99% of type 1s experience some degree of hypoglycemia unawareness. So having a system that alerts you when you're running high or low is extremely valuable. The trending information showing a rise or a fall has always been given a grade of A, because these systems are very reliable at showing whether the blood sugar is rising or falling. And that gives context to glucose levels. You don't just have a 140, you have a 140 that's rising quickly or a 90 that's dropping. It allows us to make better decisions. And the real value I find with the alerts is that it's kind of like bumper bowling. You've seen the bumpers they put up on bowling alleys sometimes? That's so the ball doesn't go in the gutter for the kids who are always, or some adults too, I suppose. This is designed to alert you when your blood sugar is approaching a dangerous place. If it's starting to creep up a little above your target, you can be notified so that you can do something about it. And when it's starting to head towards a low, you can be notified so that you can do something about it. So it's like bouncing off the bumpers. It lets you stay on the alley and hopefully hit the pins, maybe get a strike when all's said and done. Now the trending information I mentioned, it gives context to glucose levels. If you were about to get behind the wheel of your car and your blood sugar was 98, would you drive? Would you feel safe about that? What if I told you it was 98 and stable? Yeah, probably okay. Or 98 and dropping fast, you'd think differently. Any situation where you need your wits about you, where you need to be in good control. if you're about to take a test, if you're about to undergo a medical procedure, if you're about to drive, if you're about to exercise or play a sport, if you're about to go to sleep at night or take a nap, if you're about to get up and present in front of 500 people, you need to know not just where your glucose is, but where it's headed. That's valuable. It makes us all fortune tellers. We can predict the future if we know the direction our glucose is going. And that's a very, very valuable thing to have. 30 years ago, the insulins that were used were cloudy insulins that were unpredictable. NPH was a very common insulin used back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Anyone here use NPH insulin back in the day? Anyone know what NPH stands for? It's not particularly helpful. It was a frustrating insulin from the get-go. You never knew, after you injected it, you never knew when it would start, when it would peak, and when it would finish. You also didn't know how hard it would really work. It was finicky. Think of all the variables in diabetes management. Imagine having no clue when your insulin would be working after you injected it. And that's what NPH did. It was a medium to long-acting insulin. So we did away with that. Lente, similar thing. You know, nowadays we're using long-acting insulins, basal insulins, like Lantus and Levemir. There's a new one that's about to come out that's a more concentrated Lantus. These are predictable insulins. You inject it, you know what you're going to get, and that's significant. It's a major variable that we eliminate. Also, the mealtime insulin we used to use was regular insulin. It was identical to human insulin. Now, when a pancreas makes insulin, it works almost instantly. Within seconds, it's working. It peaks in a few seconds, and it's metabolized and eliminated from the body in a few minutes. When we take rapid-acting insulin, it's not quite that rapid, is it? It takes 15 minutes to start, probably an hour, hour and a half to peak, and in most cases 3 to 4 hours to finish. It's not that rapid. But regular insulin was a whole lot worse. That was our mealtime insulin, and it worked about half as fast as what we use now. That stuff took a half an hour to start, 3 hours to peak, and 6 to 8 hours to finish. So you can see where having a faster acting insulin is beneficial. You know, of course, a lot of research now is going into developing even faster insulins. We really do need something that's faster. The way insulin used to be administered was one way and one way only, and that was with big, nasty-looking syringes. One of my clients brought this in. I never had to use reusable glass syringes and steel needles. I had the disposable ones, but these are ugly, nasty mother. I mean, the needle on these is really big. The glass syringes have markings on them that don't always match the insulin concentrations that you use. They had U80, U40, and U100 syringes. So you had to get insulin that matched the syringe markings that you had. Between uses, the steel needle had to be sharpened on a stone. Imagine telling your kid after he takes his shot, "Hey Joey, go sharpen your syringe on the stone." And the glass syringe part had to be boiled and sterilized. So it was a whole ordeal every time you took a shot. Now, these days, we have better ways of administering insulin. Insulin syringes nowadays are much thinner, much shorter. And the fact is, even if somebody who's morbidly obese, we don't need to use long insulin syringe needles. A 5-millimeter needle is sufficient even in the heaviest person to get the insulin under the skin and into the fat layer under the skin. So there's no need to be using needles longer than that in any case. The syringes now have half-unit markings, so you can dose more precisely. But even better than that, we can go to insulin pens. Insulin pens now come with needles as small as 4 millimeters and 33 gauge, really, really, really thin. And again, just like with the finger stick testing, injecting insulin is painless when done properly. When done properly. It's part of the education and training process. So there have been companies developing ways of administering insulin without a needle, even though the needles don't hurt when they're used properly. One of those companies was Pfizer. 7-8 years ago, Pfizer invested over $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion, developing an inhalable insulin. The product was called Exubera. I will show you the device they came up with. Exubera, the inhaler at least, looked like this. Anyone recognize that from the 60s, early 70s? Anyone go to college here? You recognize that? Well, the insulin came in cartridges that had to be inserted in here. They were 2-unit and 3-unit insulin cartridges. Now, this was interesting. 3 2-unit cartridges was not the same as 2 3-unit cartridges. The new math. Once you inserted that, you'd vaporize it and breathe it in. What could be easier? Again, this is stuff that was developed by people who thought, oh, poor patients, they have to take needles. The needles don't hurt. This is not something we need. This is not something JDRF supports. They're looking into better stuff. But now, with the pen needles and the syringes being as small and as thin, as comfortable as they are, it's not really necessary to go to another route. There is another device that was recently approved called a Frezza. It's also an inhaler, but it's the size of a whistle. So that part's gotten a lot better. What hasn't gotten better is the insulin that we use with it. It comes in 4-unit and 8-unit cartridges. So anyone here need doses between 0 and 4? Well, you're out of luck. How about between 4 and 8? Sorry. And if you need, let's say, 12 units, you got to do 3 of these. Do it 3 times. The insulin from this does work faster than rapid-acting injected insulin, but the dosing is a nightmare. It's not designed to be used effectively by people with type 1 diabetes. So again, not something that we really need. It's just something that I guess was designed to make money. Insulin pumps, next great step. Now this was even more than 30 years ago. This was going way, way back. I guess it was a portable pump, so you could walk around with it. But the first real portable pumps looked like this, and I happen to have one with me. This is called the auto syringe. It had a big screw with a motor and a 100-unit syringe that you slapped in it, and it would infuse insulin into your body. Now the infusion set had a hard needle at the end. It was not disconnectable. You had to tape it down, and the tubing would clog all the time. But that's not my favorite thing about this device. There is a screw on the front face of the pump, and next to it is an arrow, and it says basal rate adjustment. So, follow me. If you want a different basal rate, you had to turn the screw. I found the manual for this thing, and it says, yeah, you adjust your basal rate of delivery with a turn of the screw. It doesn't say righty, lefty, loosey, tighty, or anything like that. So it's kind of a trial and error process. It's like, yeah, Johnny's high, turn it to the right. Well, now he's going low, turn it more to the left. You don't know until you try it. So, we have the ability with insulin pumps now to fine-tune things a little bit better, and obviously things have evolved with pump therapy. We actually have 6 different pumps in the US market now, each of them with their own set of advantages and disadvantages. I don't tell my clients which pump to get. I educate them on what features the different pumps have, what might be some of the challenges with some of the pumps, and let them make a decision. My website has a set of pros and cons for all 6, because I've worn all of them. I've worn 27 pumps over the years, because I get to try everything that comes out. And there are truly pros and cons to each one, but certain features that are common, often people don't take advantage of. The ability to fine-tune basal insulin with a pump is very special, but a lot of people don't take advantage of that fact because they don't get their basal rates set up properly. The ability to change your basal insulin lets you match normal physiology. Most adults have what we call a dawn phenomenon, where the basal insulin does need to peak in the early morning hours. Most children during growth years have high basal needs right through the night. Yet, programs are not often set up that way. And truly, the only way to fine-tune a basal program is to do some short fasting tests to see if you're holding steady when there's no bolus working and no food digesting. That's the only way to get the basal set up correctly. We can also make temporary adjustments to basal insulin. So if you're going to be exercising most of the day, you can lower your basal. If you're going to be sitting in meetings all day, you can raise it a little bit. Stress, high-fat foods, illness. There's a lot of situations where short-term adjustments to the basal will keep the blood sugars in range. On injections, you just can't do that. And once you've injected Lantus or Levemir, it's there, and it's working, and you can't change it. It would be nice if you could just concentrate really hard and say, okay, Lantus, I want you to work harder now. It doesn't work. I've tried. It doesn't work. So the basal is very unique with a pump. And also with boluses. Who here likes to do math? Who's really into math? There's a few weird people out there. All right. But you think about all the math that goes into figuring out bolus doses. We have insulin to carb ratios that vary by time of day. To that, you have to combine it with the correction dose based on your target blood sugar and your correction factor, which also varies by time of day. And then you may have to make a percentage adjustment for physical activity and ultimately also reduce that dose by the amount of insulin on board from all of your previous boluses, and that's based on an algorithmic equation. What could be easier? It's complicated, but the pumps now will calculate doses on our behalf. We can extend the delivery of boluses. Insulin doesn't have to be delivered all at one time at meals, because not all food digests the same way. If you sit down to a nice pasta meal, your blood sugar is not going to shoot up all at once. It's going to rise gradually over time. So giving the insulin over a period of time for huge meals or slow meals or slowly digesting foods is the way to go. It'll prevent a drop in your blood sugar followed by a rise later. Pumps have reminders that can be programmed in because, like it or not, we sometimes forget to bolus. We sometimes forget to check our blood. We sometimes forget to eat. I mean, things happen, and it's nice having those reminders built in. Site change reminders are another useful tool. Most pumps now link up with either a blood glucose meter or a continuous monitor. Medtronic was the company that came out with that first feature of the sensor and pump integrated into one unit. Animas now integrates with Dexcom. Tandem is about to integrate with Dexcom. It's just awaiting final FDA clearance. Asante Snap is going to be integrating with Dexcom. Omnipod is going to be integrating with Dexcom. So everything eventually is going to be integrated with a CGM. But many also have a meter connected, either built into the pump itself, like with Omnipod, or a meter that transmits the reading into the pump electronically so that the reading shows up in the bolus calculation. We have remote controls that can be used for most pumps that are on the market, so you don't have to catch your kid and sit on them to program something. You can just be within a few feet and do it. We have the tubeless pump with the Omnipod, which is a nice thing, especially if you do a lot of exercise and eliminates all the connecting and disconnecting hassles. Pumps now have color screens. Some have the Asante, the Tandem pump has a touch screen like an iPhone. They all are downloadable. They have database, data management capability. Pumps can hold insulin that's more concentrated. You can put U500 in. Tandem has a pump about to come out that holds 480 units. So people who are insulin resistant have a good option now. And the infusion devices are so much better, so much easier to use. Most of them are built into insertion devices, so it's a quick and uniform insertion every time you do it. So pump therapy has come a long, long way over the years. 30 years ago, when it came to analyzing data, we couldn't. Computers hardly even existed. We didn't have software for downloading meters and pumps and CGMs, but now we do. We have web-based programs that are easy to share with healthcare providers. Because I work with clients all over the world, it's really helpful to have them download to a web-based application I can see the data right from my office. There's also software that sits right on a Mac or a PC so that you can look at your numbers right there. And a lot of the software organizes the data in a way that makes it pretty easy to interpret and look for patterns and trends. And there's a growing number of mobile apps that are useful for not only record keeping, but also analysis of data. So 30 years, we've seen a lot of change there. Now, 30 years ago, the only treatment for type 1 diabetes was insulin. And that's changed also. We have a lot of new treatments, medical treatments for type 1 in addition to insulin. We're never going to eliminate insulin as a way of treating diabetes, but we have other things that can help. Here's a question for you. What makes somebody a type 1 diabetic? Insulin depends. So you don't make insulin when you have type 1. You agree? You just don't make any. Well, the fact is that's only half right, because when your beta cells of your pancreas are destroyed, you lose the ability to make insulin, but you also lose the ability to make a second hormone called amylin. It's not talked about much because you can survive without amylin. To me, amylin is kind of like Robin to Batman. You know, Batman can do okay on his own, but he needs help sometimes, and that's what amylin does for insulin. Amylin's job is to slow down the appearance of sugar in the bloodstream when we eat. It slows digestion, it blunts appetite, it also keeps the pancreas from overproducing glucagon after meals. So blood sugars after meals are much easier to manage when amylin is present. And this is one of the reasons our blood sugars spike so much when we eat, is we're lacking this hormone. It's also a reason many type 1s are just overly hungry all the time. We're lacking a hormone that suppresses our appetite. Amylin can be taken by injection now. It's in a pen form called Symlin. It's normally taken at each meal, and it really flattens blood sugars out after meals for all the reasons that I mentioned. It does have some side effects, though. Some nausea may come with it, and you may have to readjust your insulin doses a bit, but it's an effective tool for controlling post-meal blood sugar. We have another injectable medication called GLP-1. It goes by the names like Victoza, Bydureon, Byetta. The GLP-1 hormones do similar things as Symlin, but do it over a longer period of time. And they're not as potent as Symlin, but the side effects are also more subtle. So it's a good way to blunt appetite. So for people trying to lose weight, it can be very effective. And it helps to flatten out blood sugars after meals a little bit. Not as well as Symlin, but a little bit. Metformin is an oral medication. It's the most commonly used drug in diabetes. In fact, it's being used for other things besides diabetes now. It has a multitude of benefits. And metformin mainly acts on your liver and keeps it from over-secreting glucose, which is a problem for many people with diabetes. It causes blood sugars to rise overnight, causes insulin resistance, causes a very high insulin requirement. So metformin is a tool we use with many adolescents to try to control their insulin needs and also control the overnight blood sugars. There's a new class of drugs called SGLT2 inhibitors that we're using in type 1 diabetes as well as type 2. What these drugs do is they turn the kidneys into glucose-eliminating machines. We all know when blood sugars get high, we have to urinate more, and that's because we're spilling sugar in the urine. The kidneys have kind of like a dam built into them. The sugar in the bloodstream stays in the bloodstream up to about 180. When sugars get above 180, some sugar spills into the urine, and the water gets drawn with it, and we urinate more. What these drugs do, these SGLT2 inhibitors, is they lower the dam. So the kidneys are eliminating sugar into the urine continuously. It causes people to lose weight because a lot of the calories they're eating are urinated away. Post-meal blood sugars are lower. Sugars in general are quite a bit lower. Side effects, one thing, the urinary tract infections are more common. Low blood pressure can happen. To me, the major side effect, though, is all the extra urination. If you talk to somebody who's on an SGLT2 inhibitor, they will know the location of the nearest bathroom because you've got to know at all times. And one other thing we do now is we use different combinations of insulin. You don't have to just stick with one basal and one mealtime insulin. For those on injections, we often combine insulins like Lantus and NPH. NPH can play a role for people who have rising blood sugars overnight because it does work for about 8 to 12 hours. It does a nice job offsetting the overnight rise. And then the Lantus could be taken at a low dose during the day just to provide some background insulin. And at meal times, we're not limited to just using Humalog, Novolog, Apidra. We can use regular insulin at times when the meal is going to take a long time to digest. So you're not limited in your insulin choices either. A lot of good options there. 30 years ago, meal planning for diabetes consisted of an exchange diet. The exchange diet consisted of lists, lots of long lists of foods. So a bread exchange, for example, had a list of things that had qualities similar to a slice of bread. You had to know the type of food and the amount within that category. The same thing with a fruit exchange and a milk exchange, etc. So lunch did not consist of a delicious sandwich and chips and an apple. Lunch for me consisted of 3 starches, 1.5, not 2 or 1, 1.5 fruits, 1 milk, and 2 lean meats. That was my lunch. And I had to pick things out of the list. Doesn't that sound like fun? Nowadays, what do? We carb count because we know that the carbohydrates account for 99% of our blood sugar. So if we match our insulin to our carbs, not only does it give us the flexibility in what we eat, but also in how much. We can choose to eat more or less depending on our appetite and the situation. And we can match the insulin to it much more closely. Social support 30 years ago consisted of support group meetings at hospitals, mostly with people who had type 2 diabetes, but they didn't really separate them much then. And it was mostly people with type 2 who had serious debilitating complications, what we also refer to as the train wrecks. People who had seeing eye dogs, who had kidney dialysis equipment hooked up to them. It was not the most upbeat situation, trust me. Now, nowadays, social support comes in the form of e-media, things like websites, chat rooms, programs of this type. The diabetes online community is huge. There is so much good networking going on, and it's overwhelmingly positive. This is about people who are helping each other cope better, helping each other manage better, prevent health problems from happening, and just feel good on a day-to-day basis. To me, that makes a big difference in our lives. Because again, it's not all about the numbers, it's how we feel emotionally and physically on a day-to-day basis. So it's easy to look back 30 years from now, or 30 years ago, at what we were doing, and it was pretty archaic. Some of the old things we used to use, we can laugh at that. But 30 years from now, we're going to look back to 2015. We're going to laugh our asses off because we're just going to say, that was ridiculous. And again, I don't even think it will take that long. 5-10 years, we're going to look back and say, that was ridiculous. You were pricking your finger for a blood drop. Oh my God, that's unbelievable. So things will continue to change, and a lot of the change is because of the work JDRF does. So again, despite the fact that we don't have an official cure today, I wouldn't want to think about life with diabetes without the work that JDRF has done over the years. And there will be a cure someday. I mean, it's probably on the short-term horizon with some of the things you heard about earlier today. What I'm saving for the day of the cure, everyone has their own plan. Day of the cure, here's what I'm going to do. I got this box of cereal a long time ago. It was a one-of-a-kind. I think they took it off the market because it made kids too hyperactive or something. But I've saved this box of cereal. I'm a big Simpsons fan. And the day of the cure, the day I've got my encapsulation cells transplanted, or I have an artificial pancreas or an islet cell, whatever it is, day of the cure, I'm eating the whole box. Now, wouldn't it be ironic if I survive 30, 40 years with diabetes and come through scratch-free, great shape, no complications, and then this kills me? All right, so that's my mantra. We have to work towards a cure. Keep supporting JDRF's efforts, whether it's through volunteerism or financially in some way. But we got to take care of ourselves now, because when that cure comes, we don't want to have regrets. So take good care of your diabetes today, and you can enjoy it. Thank you.